G'day, Trooper Cody and Steve, and today's light horse video is about Gallipoli. It's going to be 35 degrees today, and that's why I'm not on Cody. It's just too hot to be getting on him to make this video. It's bad enough standing here in the shade. Got my canteen with me. So the video is going to be about Gallipoli, which is appropriate because the light horse were at Gallipoli, but they went without their horses. People say to me the thing they like about our videos is that they get to hear things, find out things that they didn't know. And so if I'm going to talk to you about Gallipoli, landed on the 25th of April 1915, left in January 1916, can there be much that I can tell you that you don't know? Well, I wonder if you know about the 27th of November and the 28th of November 1915. And that's because early in the morning of the 27th of November it started raining. Okay? It's the start of winter and it starts raining. The thing is, the Australian troops that were there when that rain started said they had never experienced rain anything like it before. Turkish soldiers, Turkish locals said they had never experienced anything like that rain. And later, when people who were in the villages, who had lived and born and raised and were elders in the villages in the area, they said it was unheard of weather conditions in living memory. The rain never eased for 4 hours, and in 4 hours nobody is adequately able to describe, even Charles Bean, who was there, none of the officers, articulate officers, can say they can adequately describe 4 hours of a river falling on top of them. If you've got to remember, the Turks were on high ground. The diggers, the Australians that were there, were all in the gullies and the channels and hiding down in the hills when 4 hours of rain fell. I say 4 hours because it was 4 hours of rain like a river, but then the rain just kept going all day. What that means is that those channels and the rivulets and the gullies and the channels became raging torrents of muddy water. Not just muddy water, because everywhere someone had been buried, everywhere there was a rotting corpse, they were all washed away by erosion, and the guys were flooded. The trenches were flooded, their dugouts were flooded, not just with filthy, muddy, stinking water, but also with dead bodies, rotting bodies. Every latrine that had been dug was washed away, and all of the waste in those latrines was all washed down into the gullies. This went on through the night, into the day of the 28th, that water. But, as if the water isn't bad enough, later in the afternoon, what is described by some of the officers as a cyclone came through. That's how bad the winds were. They've described it as cyclonic. How bad were the winds? It's recorded. One officer saw 2 donkeys picked up and blown into the sea. There was a pier had been constructed at the beach for the ships to come in, the smaller ships to come in with cargo, unload onto the pier. The sea in the storm became so enraged, the pier was completely demolished. Later, when they're doing a count of the damage that was done by this storm, every single ship, dinghy, boat that was on the beach, tied up at the beach, tied up at the pier, or dragged up on the beach, every one of them was shattered and gone. Darkness falls, starts to snow. Could it be any worse? No, it starts to snow. Many of the Australians recorded in their diaries, they saw, you've got to remember this is 1915. People didn't have social media, newspapers were black and white, often not actual photographs, just sketches. Many Australians recorded in their diaries, or people wrote in their diary what someone else said to them, which is, what is this? What is this falling out of the sky? Is it ash? And they had to be explained to them, no, it was snowflakes. And then some of the Australians, despite these horrendous conditions, thought it was a little bit exciting to see snow for the first time. That is, until the snow became so heavy, tents, shelters, canvas protection, all started to collapse under the weight of the snow. A British officer who was at Hill 60 in these freezing conditions, wet, windy, snow falling, well below freezing, at Hill 60 went to check on some sentries. He found them standing at their post with their rifles, frozen to death. The sentries were dead. The rifles froze, the men had bayonets fixed because they couldn't shoot their rifles. If the Turks had attacked, they couldn't. The bolts were frozen. Charles Bean records that in his dugout, icicles were protruding down from the ceiling of his dugout. He couldn't write about the conditions. He had to do it later because his ink was frozen. His hands were so cold he couldn't hold a pen anyway. And later he wrote, he was so frightened, all he could do was keep moving and keep walking because he was afraid that if he did not keep moving and walking, he would freeze to death. How bad is that? What about the fact that the ANZACs that were there had no winter uniform? They had no gloves, a lot of them were in shorts. They had no winter uniform. It's freezing cold. It's snowing. Could you possibly be thirsty? Another thing that people don't realise is when your water freezes in your canteen, how can you have a drink? Even if you must remain hydrated even in cold conditions. It is 35 degrees here today. I've got some perspiration running down my back, it's on my top lip. When I take his blanket off, he's going to be soaking wet just from standing here. But you can't understand that in freezing cold weather you still must remain hydrated. And the guys, canteens were all frozen. They had no drinking water. The cooks tried to keep going. But what the cooks found is, and I'm sure people that are involved in survivalist type activities know this, how hard it is to produce enough heat to melt snow and ice in freezing conditions and then raise the temperature of that to make tea or to cook. So the cooks couldn't cook food. Pretty horrendous conditions for about 36 hours. It's recorded that several men drowned in the flash flooding. As if it's not bad enough to be at Gallipoli being shot at and shelled and bayoneted, you drown in a river of mud, of corpses and washed out latrines. So how did it all end? At the end, one other thing. Men started reporting to the medical posts, wondering why they had grey skin. What was happening to them that they had grey skin? No one in Australia had seen frostbite before. Frostbite. The skin dies, then it starts to rot, then you get gangrene, then it can spread through your entire body and kill you. How did it all end up? So, how did it all end up? Do you know about the 27th of November 1915? What a hell of a day. Because 300 troops at Gallipoli on that day died related to cold and exposure, drowned. 300. Worse than, well, perhaps not worse than that. In addition to 300 being killed, 16,000 cases of frostbite. with some of those men losing fingers, toes and worse. So if you've watched this far, I'm just going to add thank you, because this was a request from a man in England who sent me a message to say, like your videos, I would really like to see you do one about the 27th of November. So I researched it and here it is. So I always take any requests seriously and send them in. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And the other thing is, think about sharing this with your mates and friends. Cheers. Till next time.